The year is 1874. The Dakota Prairie is a lonely place. It's a vast, empty ocean of grass that swallows up everything: sound, hope, people. And for 17-year-old Ada Prescott, it had just swallowed her entire world. She stood under a huge, silent sky, the scorched earth still warm beneath her bare feet. The family wagon was a skeleton of blackened wood and twisted metal. All that was left were two melted wheel rims, a warped skillet, and the ghost of a smell. Ash and sorrow. A few feet away were two mounds of fresh dirt, two crude crosses, made from the splintered floorboards of the wagon, stuck out of the ground. Her mother, her father. Gone. Not taken by bandits, not by bad water. They were stolen by a fever that tore through them like a wildfire. But Ada couldn't see the graves. She couldn't see the burnt wagon or the endless sky. She hadn't been able to see a thing for 10 years. Scarlet fever took her sight when she was just a little girl, leaving her in a world made of sounds, feelings, and smells. A world of darkness. She knew the graves were there because she had dug them herself. Her hands were raw, torn open and blistered. She had been guided only by the memory of where her father had laid her mother's body, and then where she had dragged his. She'd felt their cold, heavy stillness, a finality that had seeped right into her own bones. Now her world, already small, had shrunk to this single desolate patch of burned prairie. She was an island of grief in an ocean of whispering grass, and she was completely, utterly alone, or so she thought. Her days became a desperate routine, a fight for one more sunrise. In the mornings, she would tie a rope to the wagon's wreckage and walk in slow, widening circles. Her bare feet became a map of the terrain, feeling for the smallest patch of damp earth that might mean water. Her fingers combed through the grass, searching for the rough leaves of a root she could eat. The sun was a warmth on her face that told her the time of day. The wind was her only companion, a constant whisper that sometimes sounded like it was crying with her. Her only other companion was a flute. It was a simple thing, carved from a willow branch by her father one long winter back in Ohio. It was smooth and cool in her hands, the 6 holes worn into familiar dips under her fingertips. He taught her how to play, his big, calloused hands guiding hers. "Music finds a way when words get lost, Ada girl," he used to say. Now, with no one to talk to, music was all she had left. It was the only language she had for her loneliness. But she hadn't played it since they died. The grief was too sharp. It felt like a piece of broken glass lodged in her throat. She was down to her last handful of dried corn. The small tin cup she used to collect dew was almost always empty. Hunger was a constant, gnawing ache in her stomach. But there was a deeper hunger, too. A hunger for another human voice. Another person's touch. A hunger that was carving out her soul. She was 17, blind, alone, a ghost haunting the ruins of her own life. She knew this was a slow death. She was fading away. But she was too stubborn to just lie down and let the prairie take her too. So she clung to her routines. The feel of the sun, the sound of the wind. They were the only threads tethering her to a world that had forgotten she even existed. It was on the 4th day of being alone that everything changed. She was following the faint gurgling sound of what she prayed was a hidden creek. Her foot caught on something. It wasn't a rock. It was solid but soft. She pitched forward, falling into the tall grass, her hands landing on a man's leg. A scream caught in her throat. It turned to ice. Stories her father told around the campfire flooded her mind. War parties, scalpings, the things that haunted every settler's dreams. She scrambled backward, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. But the man didn't move. There was only a low, ragged groan. It wasn't a sound of anger. It was a sound of pure pain. And that sound, it cut right through her terror. It was human. She understood it. Slowly, cautiously, she crept forward again. Her hands reached out, not as weapons, but as eyes. Her fingers brushed against worn leather, then coarse fabric, and then bare skin. The skin was hot, terrifyingly hot, and it was slick with something wet and sticky. She pulled her hand back and brought it to her nose, the sharp, coppery smell of blood. He groaned again, a long, shuddering breath that was all agony. Her fear started to fade, replaced by something she hadn't felt in days. Purpose. This man, whoever he was dying. He wasn't a threat. He was just a body full of pain, about to become a memory, just like her parents. Her hands moved over him, trying to understand his story. He was long and lean. She could feel the hard muscle of his chest rising and falling in shallow, desperate pants. Her fingers found the source of the blood, a deep, jagged wound in his side, caked with dirt. It felt like he'd been gored, maybe by a buffalo. The flesh around the wound was swollen and angry with infection. Water, she whispered, the word barely a puff of air. You need water. He wouldn't understand the word, but he'd understand the act. She untied the small canteen from her waist. It held her last ration of water. Barely a cupful. Without a second thought, she uncorked it and brought it to his lips. They were cracked and dry. She gently tilted his head, letting a small trickle spill over his mouth. A shudder went through his whole body. His lips parted. He drank. He drank with a desperate, rasping thirst that spoke of a long, terrible agony. She tore a strip of cloth from the hem of her worn-out dress. The sound of the ripping fabric was like a gunshot in the prairie silence. She used a little of the precious water to dampen it and began to clean the wound. She worked slowly, her touch surprisingly gentle. The man flinched but didn't pull away. She knew it was useless. She had no medicine, no needle, no thread. She knew with the grim certainty of someone who had just watched two people she loved waste away that he was going to die. The infection was too deep. She wasn't saving him. She was just offering a moment of comfort at the end of a hard road. As the sun went down, she sat beside him. The prairie air grew cool. The man's breaths grew shallower, with long, trembling pauses in between. In those awful silences, her own loneliness rushed back in like a cold tide. She was sitting vigil over a stranger, a Lakota warrior. In any other world, he might have been her enemy. But out here, they were just two souls at the edge of existence. His presence, as fleeting as it was, had broken the spell of her solitude. As darkness settled, she knew he didn't have long. The silence between his breaths stretched out, longer and longer. She couldn't bear it. She couldn't let him die in that terrible, empty silence. Her hand found the worn leather pouch at her belt. Her fingers closed around the smooth, cool wood of her father's flute. She hadn't been able to play for her parents. The grief was a locked door. But for this stranger, this dying warrior, the music felt necessary. It was the only gift she had left to give. She lifted the flute to her lips. Her fingers found their familiar places. She took a breath, not of air, but of courage, and she played. The first note was fragile, like a newborn bird. Then the melody found its strength. It was a lament, a river of sound that carried all the sorrow she'd been holding inside. It spoke of loss and loneliness, of a world of darkness, and the ghost of a memory of light. It was the song of her heart, poured out into the vast, indifferent prairie. The music wrapped around them. The man's ragged breathing hitched, and then, impossibly, it seemed to smooth out, syncing with the rhythm of her melody. A long sigh escaped his lips. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was a sound of release. Ada played on, tears tracing clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. She played for him. She played for her mother and father. She played for herself. A final, heartbreaking farewell to the life she had lost. She played until her breath gave out, until the song faded into a single note that hung in the air like a prayer. And in the silence that followed, she heard it, the last gentle exhalation of breath from the man beside her. And then, nothing. He was gone. The stillness he left behind was different now. It was peaceful. Ada, completely spent, slumped against the still warm body of the warrior and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to the sun warm on her eyelids. For a moment she was confused, the feeling of coarse wool under her cheek and the scent of leather and dust disorienting her. Then it all came flooding back. The warrior, the music, the death. A new sound broke the morning quiet. Hoofbeats, the soft thud of many horses on the turf, the jingle of bridles, and the low, guttural murmur of voices. Many voices. Ada's blood ran cold. She froze. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. She was a mouse in a field, and the hawks were circling. The sounds grew closer, surrounding her. She could smell the horses now, their earthy, sweaty scent. She could smell wood smoke and leather on the men who rode them. A sharp click echoed right next to her ear, the sound of a rifle being cocked. She flinched, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to make herself disappear. The voices rumbled around her, a language she couldn't understand. She could feel their eyes on her, a physical pressure. This was it. This was the end her father had always warned her about. She had offered a moment of kindness to one of their own, and her reward would be a swift, brutal death. She clutched the flute in her hand, its smooth wood a final, useless comfort. A man dismounted. His footsteps were heavy on the ground. He walked right up to her, stopping just inches away. She could feel his presence, a towering shadow in her world of darkness. A voice, deeper and older than the others, spoke a single word. It sounded like a name. Chatan. A heavy, mournful silence fell over the group. Ada understood. The dead warrior had a name. He had a people, and they had found him. She braced herself for the blow, for the sharp, final pain, but it didn't come. Instead, the heavy footsteps moved past her, toward the body of the warrior. There were murmurs, sounds of sorrow. The older man, she assumed, was examining the body. Ada huddled, trembling, her world reduced to terrifying sounds and the wild beating of her own heart. The man kneeling by the body was Wapasha, Chatan's uncle, a respected elder of his band. His face was a mask of grief. He had expected to find his nephew's body twisted in agony, his face a grimace of pain from the infected wound. But Chatan's expression was one of profound peace. His limbs were relaxed as if he had simply fallen asleep. This was not the death of a man who had lain alone in fevered torment. Wapasha's gaze moved from his nephew's serene face to the wound in his side. It had been cleaned, not expertly, but gently. Someone had cared for him in his final hours. His eyes then fell on the white girl, huddled and trembling, clutching a strange wooden stick. And that's when he saw it. Her eyes. They were a pale, washed-out blue, and they stared into nothing. They didn't track his movements. She was blind. He could see it in the way she tilted her head to listen, like a frightened animal sensing predators. She was rail-thin, dressed in rags. She wasn't a threat. She was a survivor, just like them. She killed him! A sharp voice cut through the air. It was a young woman named Istas. She had been promised to Chatan. Her voice was pure venom. The white settlers encroach on our lands. They kill our buffalo, and now they murder our warriors as they lie wounded. Wapasha looked at Istas, his eyes filled with a weary sadness. Look at her, Istas. She has no weapon. Now look at his face. Is that the face of a man who was murdered? His spirit was not sent from this world in violence. It was guided. He turned back to Ada, his gaze softening, and then he remembered. The words of the old shaman, spoken on a winter's night long ago. A prophecy. When a great warrior falls, his spirit will be carried home on a breath of song from a world you do not know. A spirit woman, with eyes that see what we cannot, will show you the path. He had always dismissed it as an old man's fever dream, but now he took a step toward Ada. She flinched, a small cry escaping her lips. Wapasha stopped. He held up a hand to his men, signaling for them to stay still. He needed to understand. He crouched down, moving slowly. He pointed to Chatan's body, then made a gesture of sleeping. His head tilted on his hands. Then he pointed to the sky, to the spirit world. He was asking her, how did he die? Ada saw the shadow of his movements, her mind racing to understand. He was asking about the warrior. Her terror was still a living thing inside her, but the man's movements weren't threatening. They were questioning. She had no words, only the truth. Her hands shaking, lifted the flute. She brought it to her lips, not to play, but to show him. She mimed her fingers, dancing over the holes, her cheeks puffing as if blowing a silent note. Then she pointed from the flute to the warrior, and finally she touched her own chest, over her heart. Tears welled in her sightless eyes. It was all she could say. I played him a song from my heart as he died. A collective gasp went through the warriors. Wapasha stared at the girl, at the simple wooden flute, and then back at Cha Tan's peaceful face. A breath of song from a world you do not know. A spirit woman with eyes that see what we cannot. It all fit. The shaman's words echoed in his mind. No longer a dream, but a living, breathing prophecy. The Great Spirit, Wakan Tanka, had sent this girl, this child, to ease his nephew's passing. Her blindness wasn't a weakness, it was a sign. She wasn't distracted by the physical world. She saw the truth of the spirit. A trick, Ista scoffed. A settler's lie to save her own skin. But Wapasha wasn't listening. His grief for Cha Tan was a vast, empty canyon inside him. And this girl, this impossible event, was a ray of light in that darkness. It gave his nephew's senseless death a meaning, a spiritual significance that soothed the raw wound. It was a miracle, and his people desperately needed a miracle. He looked at Ada, at her tear-streaked face, her palpable sorrow. Her grief was as real as his own. She was not a trickster. She was a vessel. Slowly, with a reverence that stunned his warriors into silence, Wapasha lowered himself to one knee. He bowed his head, his hand placed over his heart in a gesture of profound respect. He wasn't kneeling to a white girl, a settler. He was kneeling to the Winyan Wakan, the spirit woman, the prophetess sent by the spirits to guide them. One by one, the other warriors, seeing their leader's unwavering conviction, followed his example. They lowered themselves to the ground, their fierce, proud faces turned toward the small, blind girl. The sound of their bodies kneeling in the grass was a soft rustle, a wave of submission and awe. Only Istas remained standing, her fists clenched, her face a storm of fury and disbelief. But even she, faced with the unified reverence of her people, eventually lowered herself, her movements stiff with resentment. The entire war party knelt before Ada Prescott, the girl who had done nothing more than offer a dying man the only comfort she had, a song. But as they knelt, none of them, not even Wapasha, noticed the small, smooth stone that had fallen from Chatan's pouch. It lay half hidden in the grass, pulsing with a faint, unnatural warmth against the cool morning earth. A stone that held a secret far more dangerous than any prophecy. The journey to the Lakota village was a waking dream. They placed Ada on a gentle pony, its reins held by a young warrior who walked beside her with a quiet reverence. She couldn't see the looks of awe and fear they gave her. She only knew the menacing growl of their voices had been replaced by a soft, respectful murmur. The immediate threat of death was gone, but it was replaced by a profound and terrifying confusion. Why had they spared her? Why were they treating her like a queen? They arrived at the village as the sun was high in the sky. It was a world of new sounds and smells for Ada. The barking of dogs, the laughter of children, the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a woman beating a hide. The rich aroma of roasting meat and wood smoke filled the air. She was led to a teepee that stood slightly apart from the others. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of sage and sweetgrass. A soft buffalo robe was laid out for her. She was given a bowl of warm, rich stew and a dipper of cold, fresh water. She ate like a starved animal, but her mind was reeling. A woman with gentle hands and a soft, cooing voice came and tended to her. She washed Ada's face, combed the knots from her hair, and gave her a new garment, a simple dress of soft, supple doe skin that felt like heaven against her skin. Ada submitted to it all in a state of numb shock. This wasn't captivity, it was something else entirely, an honor she couldn't possibly understand. Days began to bleed into one another. She learned through gestures and the few Lakota words she picked up that they called her Winyan Wakan, spirit woman. They believed her flute was a direct line to the spirit world. They believed her blindness allowed her to see truths hidden from them. Wapasha visited her each day. He would just sit silently in her teepee for a while, a gesture of respect she found both comforting and deeply unsettling. Other members of the tribe would leave offerings outside her door. A piece of dried jerky, a brightly colored feather, a string of polished beads. They were gifts for a goddess, and she was just a girl. But not everyone saw her as a divine gift. Istas was a pocket of cold air in the warmth of the tribe's acceptance. She wouldn't speak to Ada, but Ada could feel her watching. She would stand just outside the teepee, a silent, judgmental shadow. Ada could hear the hostility in the way Istas's moccasins scuffed the dirt. Istas believed she was a fraud, and in the quiet of her own heart, Ada knew she was right. She had no prophecies. She had no great wisdom. She was just Ada, frightened and lonely and still grieving for her parents. This role they had thrust upon her was a costume that was too big, a heavy mantle of expectation she could not possibly bear. She had traded the isolation of the open prairie for the isolation of a pedestal, surrounded by people, yet more alone than ever. One evening, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, she sought her only solace. She sat at the entrance of her teepee, the cool night air on her face, and raised her father's flute to her lips. She didn't play for the spirits. She didn't play for the people who called her a prophetess. She played for herself. She played the melodies of her childhood in Ohio, songs of green hills and flowing rivers, a world of light and color she held only in her memory. Then she played the sorrowful tune she had played for Cha Tan, the notes weeping into the darkness. It was a conversation with her ghosts, a way of remembering who she was, the girl named Ada, before she became the spirit woman. As she played, the village fell silent. The sounds of dogs and chatter died away. People emerged from their teepees, drawn by the music. They stood in the darkness, listening, their faces rapt. They didn't hear songs of a distant home. They heard the voice of the spirits. They heard whispers of the coming buffalo, the promise of rain. In her simple, honest grief, they found a profound and holy mystery. Wapasha stood among them, his heart swelling with conviction. He had been right. The spirit woman was communing with those who walked the sky. Her song was a bridge between their worlds. He glanced at Istas, who stood at the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed. And for the first time he saw not just anger in her face, but a flicker of doubt, a sliver of unwilling awe. Ada finished her song, the last note fading into the chirping of crickets. The silence that followed was filled with a shared reverence. She didn't know what they heard in her music, what false hopes they gleaned from her simple tunes. She only knew that here, her music had given her more than just solace. It had given her a home. It was a fragile belonging, built on a profound misunderstanding, but it was belonging all the same. She was no longer Ada Prescott, the blind, abandoned settler girl. She was the spirit woman of the Lakota, a prophetess who spoke with a breath of song. But a misunderstanding can be a dangerous foundation, and the truth has a way of coming out, often in the most violent way imaginable. Weeks turned into a month. Ada settled into a strange rhythm. The tribe cared for her, fed her, protected her. In return, she played her flute. Her music became the backdrop of their lives, a song for the morning sun, a lament for a hunt that failed, a hopeful tune for the coming rains. She was a living myth, a story they told themselves to make sense of a harsh world. But Istas was not content to let the story stand. She saw a snake in their garden, and she was determined to crush its head. One afternoon, Istas entered Ada's teepee without warning. Ada heard her sharp, deliberate footsteps. "Spirit woman," Istas said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The hunters have returned with nothing for 3 days. The children are hungry. Tell us where the buffalo are. Sing them to us." It was a direct challenge, a trap. The whole village was listening just outside. Ada's heart pounded. This was it. The moment the pedestal would crumble. She had no answer. She was a fraud, and everyone was about to find out. She sat in silence, her mind screaming. The silence stretched. The respect of the tribe was turning into suspicion. She could feel it. She reached for her flute, her only shield, but her hands were shaking too much to play. Then something strange happened. As her trembling fingers brushed against the leather pouch at her belt, she felt a peculiar warmth. It was the pouch that had belonged to Cha Tan, the one they had given her along with his other effects. She'd never opened it. Now her fingers fumbled with the drawstring. Inside, her fingertips found a small, smooth stone, the one that had fallen in the grass. The moment she touched it, her world exploded. Not with light, but with sensation. A flash of images, sounds, and smells flooded her mind. The crackle of a fire, much hotter than a campfire. The sharp, acrid smell of whiskey, the sound of rough, angry voices, not speaking Lakota, but English, and a single terrifying image burned into her brain, a man's hand, with a distinctive snake tattoo coiling around the wrist, holding a flaming torch. She gasped, dropping the stone as if it were a hot coal. The vision vanished. She was back in the teepee, the scent of sage and buffalo hide filling her senses again. But she was trembling, not with fear, but with a horrifying realization. That fire, why, it wasn't a campfire. It was her family's wagon. She stood up, her voice shaking but clear. "The buffalo are not the true problem," she said, the words feeling foreign in her own mouth. "There is a shadow on this land, a fire, a snake that poisons the ground." She was just repeating the fragments of the vision, words tumbling out of her without thought. Outside, a murmur went through the crowd. This was not the answer they expected. Ista scoffed loudly. "She speaks in riddles because she has no answers. She is a liar." But Wapasha pushed through the crowd and entered the teepee. He looked at Ada, his wise old eyes searching her face. "What did you see, spirit woman?" Ada didn't know how to explain it. A vision? A memory? She fumbled for the stone and held it out. This, it was his. Chatan's. It showed me things. Wapasha took the stone. His eyes widened. It was a Waya stone, a sacred object used by shamans for generations to commune with the spirit world. They had thought it was lost. Chatan must have found it. "He wasn't gored by a buffalo," Ada whispered, the pieces clicking into place with dizzying speed. "The wound in his side, it wasn't from a horn. He was stabbed by a man with a snake on his hand." A stunned silence fell over the teepee. Wapasha's face hardened. He knew the mark. A small band of white men, whiskey traders and prospectors, had been causing trouble at the edge of their territory. Their leader was a vicious man known for the serpent tattoo on his wrist. They called him Adder. "They did this," Wapasha said, his voice a low growl. "They murdered my nephew." Suddenly, Ada's personal tragedy collided with the tribe's. The fire, the wagon, the fever her parents had. Had it really been a fever? Or was it something else? Something given to them? "They were at my family's wagon," Ada choked out. "I smelled the whiskey. I heard them. They, they killed my parents. And they killed Chatan." The lie she had been living was suddenly gone, replaced by a truth that was 100 times more terrifying. She wasn't a prophetess who had found a dead warrior. She was the sole survivor of a massacre, and she had stumbled upon another victim of the very same killers. Ista stared at her, her venomous expression replaced by one of shocked confusion. If this was true, then Ada was not a liar. She was a witness. The entire dynamic of the village shifted in that single moment. Ada was no longer a fragile goddess on a pedestal. She was an oracle of vengeance, and the stone in her hand wasn't just a holy relic. It was a key, a map to the monsters who had destroyed her world. And now she had an entire tribe of warriors at her back, ready to help her hunt them down. The mood in the village turned from reverence to a thirst for justice. A war council was called. Ada, no longer an outsider, sat at the center of it, the Waya stone held tightly in her hand. Wapasha translated as she described everything the stone had shown her. The scent of pine trees near a fast-moving river, the taste of gritty, bitter coffee, the sound of a metal hammer striking rock. They were prospectors. They were searching for gold. Chatan must have discovered their camp, Wapasha reasoned. They killed him to keep their secret. "But why my parents?" Ada asked, her voice tight with grief and rage. "Your wagon was heading west through the Black Hills," Wapasha said gravely. "The land they are poisoning, your family was not sick. They were in the way. Adder and his men would not leave witnesses." The casual cruelty of it stole her breath. Her parents hadn't died from a random act of nature. They had been murdered for convenience. Istas, who had been silent throughout the council, finally spoke. Her voice was different now. The sharp, cutting edge was gone, replaced by a grim determination. "Chatan was the best tracker in our band. If he found them, he would have left a sign, something for us to follow." The tribe prepared for war, Warriors painted their faces and their horses. The air buzzed with a deadly energy. Ada, who had been a symbol of peace, had become a catalyst for vengeance. The weight of it was immense. She wasn't just seeking justice for her parents anymore. The fate of Chatan and the honor of this tribe that had taken her in now rested on her shoulders and on the strange, fragmented visions given to her by a warm, smooth stone. She knew she had to go with them. She was the only one who could interpret the stone's clues. The prospect of leaving the safety of the village was terrifying, but the thought of letting her parents' killers escape was unbearable. They rode out at dawn, a small, deadly party of warriors, Wapasha, Istas, and a handful of their best trackers. And Ada, riding in their midst, a blind girl guided by the ghosts in a rock. Each day she would hold the stone, focusing, trying to coax another piece of the puzzle from it. The visions were never clear. They were a chaotic jumble of senses. One day it was the feeling of cold, damp moss. The next it was the sound of a particular bird call. Istas watched her with a new, complex expression. It wasn't just respect, it was a kind of kinship. "You feel his loss too," she said to Ada one evening as they made camp. It wasn't a question. "He was the first person I'd touched in days," Ada confessed. "Even though he was dying, he reminded me that I wasn't alone." "He was. My sun and my moon," Istas said softly. "When he died, I wanted to hate the world. I wanted to hate you. It was easier than feeling the emptiness." A fragile bond formed between them, forged in their shared grief. Istas, with her sharp eyes, and Ada, with her otherworldly senses, became a strange but effective team. Ada would describe a sound, and Istas would identify the bird that made it, telling them which direction to travel. Ada would describe the feel of a certain type of rock, and Istas would lead them to the only creek bed in the area with those stones. They were getting closer. Ada could feel it. The visions from the stone were becoming stronger, more frequent. The smell of whiskey was sharper. The sound of the hammers was louder. But then, the stone showed her something new, something that made her blood run cold. She saw the snake tattoo again, but this time the hand wasn't holding a torch. It was holding a flute, her father's flute. She gasped, dropping the stone. "My flute," she whispered in horror. "He has it." Wapasha looked at her, confused. "Your flute is here, in your pack." "No," Ada said, her mind reeling. "There was another one. My mother. She carved a small one for me when I was a child, after I lost my sight. So I could always have music. It was in the wagon. I thought it burned." A sickening realization washed over her. Adder hadn't just murdered her parents and burned their wagon. He had looted it. He had walked through the wreckage of her life, picking through her family's belongings, and he had taken a small, worthless wooden flute, a memento, a trophy. The thought of that man, that monster, holding something so precious, so deeply a part of her, filled her with a rage so pure and hot it burned away all her fear. This was no longer just about justice. This was personal. "He's close," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "I can feel him." The trail led them high into the Black Hills, a sacred land for the Lakota. The air grew thin and cool. The visions from the Waya stone were now a constant, chaotic storm in Ada's mind. She could almost taste the stale coffee on her tongue, feel the vibrations of the prospectors' hammers in her bones. They were in the heart of the snake's den. Istas, scouting ahead, returned with a grim look on her face. "At camp," she signed to Wapasha. "5 men. They have rifles, and they are tearing up the earth by the sacred creek." Wapasha's jaw tightened. This was a deep blasphemy. They weren't just murderers, they were defilers. They made their plan as dusk settled over the hills. The warriors would attack at dawn, using the element of surprise. Ada's role was to stay back, to stay safe, but she refused. "I have to be there," she insisted. "That man, Adder, I will know him when I am near him." The rage had given her a strange, reckless courage. Wapasha, seeing the fire in her, reluctantly agreed. The night before the attack was tense and silent. Ada couldn't sleep. She sat with the Waya stone in her lap, letting the visions wash over her. She saw it all now. The whole story. Adder and his men finding Cha-Tan near their illegal mine. Cha-Tan fighting back, but he was 1 against 5. They mortally wounded him, but he managed to escape, clutching the sacred stone he had taken from their camp, trying to bring it home. Then she saw her parents' wagon, Adder demanding to know what they had seen, her father standing his ground. The flash of a knife, the fire. It played over and over in her mind, a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Just before dawn, the warriors moved out, silent as ghosts. Ada was with them, her hand on Istas's shoulder, her other hand clutching her father's flute. The camp was just over a ridge. Ada could smell their cook fire, the foul stench of unwashed bodies and cheap whiskey. It was the smell from her vision, the smell of death. As the first hint of light touched the sky, Wapasha gave a sharp cry, the signal to attack. The world erupted in chaos. War cries and the thunder of hooves mixed with the surprised shouts of the prospectors and the crack of rifle fire. Ada dropped to the ground, her senses overwhelmed. The air was thick with the coppery scent of blood. She heard a man shout in English, close by. "It's the savages! Get the gold!" A voice, rough and venomous, cut through the noise. "Forget the gold, you fools! Kill them all!" Ada knew that voice. It was the voice from her vision. It was Adder. Guided by the sound, she began to crawl forward, toward the heart of the fight. It was madness. She was blind, unarmed, crawling into a battle. But she didn't care. All she could think about was the man with the snake on his hand, the man who held her mother's gift. She heard a grunt of pain nearby. "Istas! Istas!" she cried out. "I am fine." The warrior woman grunted back, but her voice was strained. "My arm! An arrow!" Ada kept crawling. The sounds of the fight were desperate now. The prospectors were well armed. She could hear the Lakota warriors falling. They were losing. Then she heard it, a sound that cut through the chaos, a sound that shouldn't be there. A melody. It was a clumsy, broken tune, played on a small, high-pitched flute. It was a child's song, her song, the one her mother had taught her on that little flute. He was playing it. That monster was standing in the middle of this carnage, mocking her memory. The rage inside her became a white-hot fire. She scrambled to her feet, holding her father's larger flute like a club. "You!" she screamed, her voice raw. "You have something of mine." The clumsy music stopped. Out of the chaos, a figure emerged, walking toward the sound of her voice. She couldn't see him, but she could feel his presence. Cold, vile. "Well, look what we have here," Adder's voice sneered. "The little blind bird. I thought we left you to burn." Ada stood her ground, her body trembling with a mixture of terror and fury. "Give it back," she said, her voice shaking. "The flute! Give it back!" He laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "This little thing? I found it in the dirt. A piece of trash, just like its owner." In that moment, Ada knew what she had to do. It was a crazy, desperate idea, but it was the only one she had. She lifted her own flute, her father's flute, to her lips. She took a deep breath, and she played. She didn't play a song of sorrow. She didn't play a song of vengeance. She played the loudest, most piercing, most dissonant note she possibly could. It was a shriek of pure sound, a scream of grief and rage turned into music. The effect was instantaneous. The sound was so jarring, so unexpected, that for a split second everyone, Lakota warrior and prospector alike, froze. The battle stopped. All eyes turned to the blind girl and the tattooed man. And in that moment of silence, Wapasha, who had been pinned down by rifle fire, saw his opening. He lunged, his war club a blur. Adder, distracted by the unearthly sound and the girl in front of him, turned a fraction of a second too late. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. Silence fell over the small clearing, a heavy final silence, punctuated by the groans of the wounded. Ada stood, still trembling, the flute still pressed to her lips. She lowered it slowly. "Is it over?" she whispered. Istas came to her side, clutching her wounded arm. "It is over," she said, her voice filled with awe. "Spirit woman, your song, it stunned them. It gave us the moment we needed." Ada didn't feel like a spirit woman. She felt empty, drained. She knelt on the ground, her hands searching the dirt. Her fingers brushed against a small, smooth piece of wood. The little flute, her mother's gift. She clutched it to her chest, and for the first time since her parents died, she allowed herself to truly sob. They returned to the village not just as victors, but as legends. The story was told and retold around the campfires. The story of the blind girl, the Winyan Wakan, whose spirit song had won them the battle. In the days that followed, Ada finally confessed everything to Wapisha, about the stone not being a vision giver, but a memory holder, about her not being a prophetess, just a girl who had lost everything. The old chief listened patiently. When she was finished, he smiled a sad, wise smile. The spirits work in many ways, Ada Prescott, he said. The shaman's prophecy did not say how the spirit woman would guide us. It did not say she would have visions of the future. It only said she would come with a breath of song, with eyes that see what we cannot. Your eyes do not see the world, so you saw the truth in your heart. Your song did not call the buffalo, but it called forth a moment of justice. The prophecy was fulfilled, just not in the way we expected. Ada had found her home. Her belonging was no longer built on a misunderstanding, but on a shared history of loss and triumph. Istas, her arm bandage, became her closest friend, her eyes for the world. They were an unlikely pair, the sharp-eyed warrior and the blind musician. Ada still played her flute. She played the songs of her childhood, the songs of the prairie wind, and the songs of her new family, the Lakota. Her music was no longer just a language for her loneliness. It was a language of hope, a testament to the fact that even in the deepest darkness, a single note of courage, a single breath of song, can change everything. She had been a blind, abandoned girl, a ghost haunting the ruins of her life. But the prairie hadn't swallowed her after all. It had given her a voice and a reason to sing. If you enjoyed this story of survival, courage, and unexpected justice, do me a huge favor and hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because you won't want to miss the twisted tales we have coming up next. Thanks for listening.